Welcome back to episode 3 of Hike and Spike, the football podcast that stops the clock and gives you coverage on the latest NFL trends. Today, we'll be talking about our fantasy predictions for next year. Now, Andy, to start our initial take.
All right, thank you, Aki. So, for this initial take, we will be talking about one fantasy sleeper who we think will exceed expectations this season. So, Rohan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Andy. My initial take is about Drew Lock, a player that I predict will have a breakout season. Last year with the Broncos, after Joe Flacco got injured, Lock started for 5 games and went on to win 4 of those games. Essentially, he carried the Broncos from 3-8 to a respectable 7-9. This is similar to what Jimmy G did with the 49ers back in 2017, and Jimmy G just had a breakout year. Furthermore, Drew Lock has an immensely talented receiving core with Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, KJ Hamler, and Noah Fant, so I see him having a great season.
All right, I'll go next. So, my sleeper pick is Brashad Perriman. Now, this isn't just a late round sleeper. This is a player who's only owned in 28% of leagues. So, you can probably get away with taking him with your last pick. But you look at his performance last year on the Buccaneers as a third string receiver behind both Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, and with one of the worst quarterbacks in the league in famous James Winston. And during the last 5 games of the season, he averaged 21.2 points per game. Now he's on a Jets offense where he is likely the first string wide receiver because Robbie Anderson is gone. And Sam Darnold is going to improve a lot this year, especially with the addition of Mekhi Becton to help solve their sack issues. So I can see Rashad Perriman being a very solid flex or even wide receiver number 2 this year.
And finally, my sleeper pick is Raheem Mostert, running back for the 49ers. Now, this isn't really a sleeper pick as much as the other two are, but there are still a lot of places where Raheem Mostert is not in starting positions, even when there's several other running backs playing on a given week. Now, last year, although he only had the 26th most rush yards in the league, he only carried the ball 137 yards or 137 carries. For reference, Derrick Henry, the guy who was first, carried the ball 303 times, which is more than double, but his yards were barely double of Raheem Mostert. Clearly, the 49ers have figured out, especially in the game against the Green Bay Packers, that they are best when they are a rushing team, and Jimmy Garoppolo's arm can only carry them so far in certain games, especially with the current schedule and the lack of clutter that was in the backfield last year. I think Raheem Mostert is poised to have a top 10, maybe top 15 rushing season. So definitely a good pick in one of your mid to late rounds. Now to Rohan for our trivia segment this week.
Next, we have our weekly trivia segment, and I am the host for this one. I will ask 5 questions related to the NFL fantasy points and stats worth 10 points each, and after 7 more episodes, the winner will make the loser do a forfeit. Just to remind everyone of the scores, I have 40 points, while the other two have none. Let's move on to the first question. Last year, which player recorded the most fantasy points of the season? A. Will Fuller. Oh, like most fantasy points in a single game, what I meant to say. A. Will Fuller. B. Christian McCaffrey. C. Sammy Watkins. Or D. Aaron Jones. An answer from Andy. Can you please say it?
I think it is A, Will Fuller.
And that is the correct answer. Andy is now on the board for 10 points, and Aki still has 0. Let's move on to the second question. Which player has the most fantasy points ever scored in a single season? A. Christian McCaffrey. B. Marshall Faulk. C. Jerry Rice. And finally D. LaDainian Tomlinson. Okay, we have an answer from Aki. Can you please say it?
I went with C. Jerry Rice.
Unfortunately, that is incorrect. Andy, now your answer.
A complete guess, but I guess B, Marshall Faulk.
Oh, that was very close, but the correct answer is actually LaDainian Tomlinson with the Chargers. Okay, let's move on to the third question. This one should be a little bit easier. Last year, which kicker recorded the most fantasy points of the season? A. Will Lutz, B. Harrison Butker, C. Justin Tucker, and D. Matt Gay. Andy, can you please say your answer?
I think it was the Chiefs kicker, Harrison Butker.
And that is correct. Andy now has 20 points, and Aki still has yet to get on the board. Hopefully you can get these next two questions correct, Aki. Let's move on to the next question. In the PPR format, which player was the best fantasy wide receiver of the last decade? A. Antonio Brown, B. Julio Jones, C. Larry Fitzgerald, or D. Doug Baldwin? Andy, your answer, please.
I'm kind of guessing on this one, but I think it's Julio Jones.
Unfortunately, that is incorrect. Now moving on to Aki's answer.
I also guessed Julio Jones. I was incorrect.
Yeah, unfortunately, the correct answer is actually Antonio Brown. A bit of a surprise, but he was a very good wide receiver during the past decade. Now let's move on to the last question. Which player was the highest score kicker of the decade? A. Adam Vinatieri, B. Mason Crosby, C. Matt Bryant, or D. Stefan Gostkowski? An answer from Andy. Can you please say it?
I think it's Adam Vinatieri.
Unfortunately, that is also incorrect. Now moving on to Aki's answer.
I went with the Patriots kicker, D. Gostkowski.
Aki is now on the board for 10 points, and Andy scored 20 points this episode. So that was a good trivia segment, and the final score is me with 40 from the last two episodes, Andy with 20, and Aki with 10. So now let's move on to our main segment.
Thanks for the trivia, Rohan. I'm glad I got on the board. Now for the main segment of this episode, we will be discussing the top 10 fantasy quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers, and only the top 5 tight ends, defenses, and kickers. We will be assuming a PPR format, although that should not make a major impact on the overall rankings. First, we'll be talking about the kickers. Rohan?
Yeah, so for my rankings, I have Matt Gay coming in at 5th, the Buccaneers kicker. At 4th, I have Robbie Gould. At 3rd, I have Justin Tucker. At 2nd, I have Will Lutz. And at 1st, I have Harrison Butker of the Chiefs.
All right, we're gonna move on to defenses then. So for my 5th one, I had the Bears. And then at 4, I had the Patriots. At 3, I have the Steelers. And then 2nd is the Ravens. And finally, I think the best defense and special teams this year will be the 49ers.
Okay. Let's talk about the 49ers defense. So, although they were really good last year, they have a lot of pieces who are aging, and their draft was almost entirely focused on the offensive side. Additionally, they lost a really good defensive tackle in DeForest Buckner, and they only got Javon Kinlaw, who is very much unproven and can easily make some rookie mistakes. So what do you think there's about the 49ers that other teams can't just leapfrog over them, especially with their corner situation only becoming worse?
I disagree. I think the 49ers still have the best defense in the league. And I think you say that they kind of solely focused on offense in the draft, but they still got Javon Kinlaw, as you said. And Javon Kinlaw will, I think, be a great replacement for DeForest Buckner. I don't think that the 49ers cornerback situation is getting significantly worse. I think this is still the best defense in the league.
And I also had a question about your Bears ranking. I was wondering why it was placed in the top 5 when they only average 7 points per game. Because I do know that they have some very stacked players, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll all perform very well together. Because as we saw with the Browns offense last year, with players such as Baker Mayfield, OBJ, and Jarvis Landry, it didn't necessarily live up to the expectations. So why do you see the Bears defense ranking so high?
I just think that as a team this year, they will improve a lot. Any maybe chemistry situations last year, now that these players are more experienced, and that they've played more together, I think they'll be able to work together better in the upcoming season. So that's why I think that they'll live up to the expectations that they were meant to fill last year.
Cool. Now, moving on to the tight end rankings. At number 5, I have Zach Ertz. Number 4, Darren Waller. Number 3, Mark Andrews. Number 2, Travis Kelce. And number 1, George Kittle. I think that this is a pretty basic list. It's nothing too much out of the ordinary. Some rankings have Ertz and Waller switched. A lot of them have Kelce and Kittle switched. But overall, it's quite similar to what most people have.
Yeah, I think that although George Kittle is a very good tight end, and I think he's even better as a tight end than Travis Kelce, the only problem with him, I think, is that he doesn't have as good of a quarterback. I know Garoppolo's good, but I don't think he's as good as Patrick Mahomes, as well as that the 49ers are a very run-based offense. Like we saw that last year with Raheem Mostert becoming the key part of the offense. And finally, I think that Kittle just spends too much time blocking. Although he's a great receiving tight end, just like Kelce, Kelce doesn't block as much, and I think that's why he gets more catches and more points.
I don't know if that's necessarily true because last year George Kittle and Travis Kelce were nearly neck and neck, and I believe they're actually averaging the same amount of points per game in a PPR. I actually already said that in a PPR format, but even then, George Kittle played for 14 games and Kelce played for all 16 games. And if Kittle played the same amount of games as Kelce, Kittle was actually projected to have a little bit more points than Kelce, even with all the offense stuff that you discussed. So I think George Kittle should stay number 1.
Also, the 49ers lost a bunch of pieces which they were using in other facets of the game. So like Emmanuel Sanders, and they replaced it with like Brandon Ayuk, who obviously isn't going to have the same immediate impact as Emmanuel Sanders did. So a couple more passes at least will be thrown George Kittle's way. And I think, if anything, if he stays healthy, he should do better than Kelce, who's on a stacked Chiefs team with a lot of other wide receivers.
Yeah, adding on to that, I don't think this is a good thing, but Debo and Richie James both got injured, and I believe Debo is the number 1 wide receivers. And although he may recover shortly, I think he'll still be out for a couple games. So George Kittle will probably be the number 1 receiver overall on the team.
Now moving on to the ones where we have top 10 ranked, which are respectively wide receiver, running back, and quarterback. Rohan, with the wide receivers.
At number 10, I have Allen Robinson. At number 9, I have Juju Smith-Schuster. At number 8, I have Tyreek Hill. At number 7, I have Kenny Golladay. At number 6, I have DeAndre Hopkins. At number 5, I have Devontae Parker. At number 4, I have Devontae Adams. At number 3, I have Chris Godwin. At number 2, I have Julio Jones. And finally, at number 1, I have Michael Thomas.
All right, I think the main one that we have to talk about here is that very interesting Devontae Parker pick at 5. Would you like to explain why you think that he'll be that good?
I'm going to explain this a little more in my hot take, but essentially I think Devontae Parker, even with a pretty lackluster Dolphins offense last season and all the limited resources he had, he was still able to put up 1,200 receiving yards and 9 touchdowns. But with the newly reinvigorated Dolphins offense, with new players such as Austin Jackson, who's an offensive lineman, and also Tua commanding the backfield, I think that Devontae Parker will be able to put up an even better season than he did last year.
I have a couple of questions about missing names, namely Amari Cooper and Mike Evans. They both performed extremely well last season and had very good per-game statistics. What about their situation makes them worse than, say, Allen Robinson?
Well, Allen Robinson is a number 1 wide receiver, and he has Mitchell Trubisky, a very talented Pro Bowl quarterback, leading his back. Not just kidding, but he actually did make the Pro Bowl somehow. a couple years ago, but leading his backfield. So Allen Robinson is a number one wide receiver, and he got around 1,200 receiving yards, which is pretty respectable for his situation. And I think he'll be able to emulate those stats. But with players like Mike Evans, I don't know if he's the number one wide receiver anymore with Chris Godwin. And Rob Gronkowski will also be taking away from his receiving yards. And I think passing might be a little bit harder for the Bucs this season, just because Tom Brady still needs to adjust to the new systems. And then with other players, who's the other player that you mentioned that didn't make the ranking?
Amari Cooper.
Oh yeah, I don't know. The Cowboys situation's a little bit weird with three very talented wide receivers. I don't think Amari Cooper will get as much production with CeeDee Lamb also becoming a wide receiver threat on the Cowboys.
I actually disagree. I think that the addition of CeeDee Lamb will actually help to boost Amari Cooper, because I think that just having that extra option will allow Dak to have more options and will force opposing defenses to have to spread out their defense more evenly, so that Amari Cooper maybe won't be doubled as much as he was last year. I think it actually could increase his production. And then finally, I want to talk about you having Tyreek Hill at the in eighth place, whereas I think a lot of fantasy experts say that he's second. So why do you think he won't be so good?
Tyreek Hill came off of a pretty big injury last season that nearly cost him the whole season, and I feel like that'll sort of be a shock to the team, and I think it's going to take him some more time to recover. And I think he still will be a top 10 wide receiver, but I don't know if he'll put up, for example, a 1,500-yard season after coming off of a pretty devastating injury.
Well, actually, you see that last season, even after he came off of this injury, he performed basically just as well as he did in previous seasons before the injury. I think he's already recovered fine, and I think that injury shouldn't affect him at all coming into this new season. All right.
I'm with Andy on that one. I think Tyreek Hill should be a little higher. He clearly showed that he's still the extremely fast speed demon that we all know him to be. So, yeah, I think he should be a bit higher. Maybe not at 2, but still a little bit higher.
All right, now moving on to the running backs. At 10, I had Miles Sanders, and then at 9, I had Joe Mixon. 8 is Nick Chubb. At number 7, I have Alvin Kamara. Number 6 is Aaron Jones. Number 5 is Derrick Henry. 4 is Dalvin Cook. 3rd is Ezekiel Elliott. And then the top 2 are Saquon Barkley and then Christian McCaffrey.
All right, I'm going to talk about Derrick Henry. He clearly showed that he was the real deal, especially when playoff time came around. And as you mentioned in your notes, that there's 25. He averaged around 25 or 30 fantasy points per game in the second half of the season, and in playoff atmosphere, the stats he was putting up were just insane. The Titans also added offensive linemen in the draft to protect him and make it even more deadly of a run offense. And I think that the way the Titans offense is structured, that Derrick Henry is going to get a lot more touches than we're used to seeing in many other halfbacks. So I feel he could probably easily jump up to 3rd or 4th.
Right. Now, I didn't say he's going to perform terribly or anything. 5th is still very respectable. But I think that the problem that the Titans have is because their offense is so one-dimensional, the defenses that are playing against them are also going to be very one-dimensional. They're going to be just trying to stop the run the whole game, and I think that's going to potentially hinder Derrick Henry's performance. As well, you said that he performed very well in playoff scenarios, but this is not a playoff scenario. This is just the fantasy is just a regular season, so I don't know if he can perform as well as he did in the playoffs.
So something that I wanted to add was I think some players such as Chris Carson and Leonard Fournette, who both had 1,200 yards rushing seasons last year, are not on this list. But first year rookies that just came off of a good season, like Miles Sanders, are on this list. So I'm a bit curious as to why you think Miles Sanders should rank higher than these two players, given that he's just a first-year rookie that's coming back for his second season.
Well, I think you look at Miles Sanders' performance last year, and even though he maybe didn't have a great start in the beginning, he really performed very well in the second half, putting up amazing numbers, especially for a rookie. And I think he'll be able to carry that into his second year. The problem that I have with a player like Chris Carson is that the Seahawks also have a very strong pass offense with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And as well as that, they don't have a very good offensive line, which could hinder Chris Carson's performance. So that's why I don't think that he will be as good as Miles Sanders.
Also, someone to talk about, there's a couple of names which I feel could sneakily pop up in there, such as obviously like some of the top players like Mark Ingram and Austin Eckler, who aren't there here, but they could easily have top 10 seasons as shown by last year and how their respective teams haven't changed too much. If anything, I feel like Austin Eckler could get better since there's so much quarterback controversy. They'll be relying on the run a bit more. So yeah, and also other names are a bit more down, like your Chris Carsons or your Damian Williams or Kenyon Drake, Josh Jacobs.
So you mentioned a lot of names there. So the first one I think you said was Austin Eckler, I believe. I think the problem with Austin Eckler is that the quarterback controversy could actually hinder his performance. Not saying that they won't rely on the run as much. I just think that this organization could be in so much chaos that they can't really get any production done on offense at all. And you look at Austin Eckler's performance last year, and he was really actually more of a receiving back than a true running back. And that's why I think that a weak pass offense could cause him to struggle. You also mentioned Damian Williams. Now, Damian Williams is just not going to perform well at all. First of all, you got Clyde Edwards-Helaire replacing him. He's not even going to be a running back one anymore. But if you want to talk about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, maybe I think I was considering putting him in the top 10, but I just think that as a rookie, and it's just so hard to predict how they will do in their first season adapting to the NFL. So that's why I couldn't put Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Sure. And finally, the one which the casual fan is probably looking forward to the most, the QB rankings. So at number 10, I have Josh Allen. At number 9, I have Deshaun Watson. Number 8, Matt Ryan. Number 7, Dak Prescott. Number 6, Tom Brady. Number 5, Drew Brees. Number 4, Kyler Murray. Number 3, Patrick Mahomes. Number 2, Russell Wilson. Number 1, Lamar Jackson. And yes, I made it controversial on purpose.
All right. One interesting thing that I can notice here immediately is that Patrick Mahomes is your third option behind Russell Wilson. Do you want to explain why you think that will happen?
I feel like although we saw some amazing things from Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, he didn't look like himself in the regular season. I feel he's the type of player who just coasts to a casual 10-6, 11-5 record during the regular season, and then just try his hardest in the playoffs. I'm not saying he's the third best quarterback in the league, but players like Lamar Jackson and Russell Wilson, who give a lot of effort, give probably their 100% effort every game, clearly, especially like last year. And also I feel are probably a little bit more durable than Patrick Mahomes, who got injured a couple times throughout last couple seasons. I feel like they will have better overall seasons.
Yeah, I think that you say that Patrick Mahomes didn't perform very well in the regular season last year, but actually I think he was like the third best quarterback or something like that, despite being injured for like a few games. I think that he averaged about as many points as Lamar Jackson did. And I think he is going to have I think he is going to be the best passer in the league, only behind Lamar Jackson because of Lamar Jackson's running abilities. And you just look at his receiving core and offensive line compared to Russell Wilson's. I think that even though Russell Wilson has decent receivers, they're not as good as players like Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, and his O line isn't as good either. So that's why I think Mahomes should definitely be your second option.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this now, but last year, you're talking about averages. Russell Wilson averaged 20.85 points. Patrick Mahomes averaged 20.86 points. So it's really not that big of a difference. I can easily see if Patrick Mahomes has an off game or misses a game, Russell Wilson could easily jump over him, as he did last season.
So another question that I have about your rankings is with Tom Brady. Now, I'm a little curious why he's in the top 10, because last year I think he may have been a top 10, but if he was definitely way later in the list. But you have him ranked at around 6th. So do you care to explain why he's ranked so high?
Sure, because other players are gonna fall a little bit lower, such as Aaron Rodgers. He clearly is starting to regress. He's gonna go. I mean, even though he had a good statistical season last year, he's not gonna be able to keep up with a lot of the young, good defensive teams that are good against immobile quarterbacks. The thing is, Tom Brady just has so many weapons. He can literally do anything and it'll probably work. He has 2 1,000-yard receivers and Gronk, who's probably one of the best tight ends of all time. There's almost nothing which he can do wrong. Even though he's like 42, 43, and he was like 11th or 12th last season, the Patriots were having a bit of turmoil and stuff, and there's really only like one really proven receiver on the Patriots. There's a couple of other young receivers who've done well occasionally, but they aren't as proven as Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. The whole environment, Brady has a motive, and I think things are going to spark. He's going to have a very good season.
One other question I had was why you had Drew Brees, like quarterbacks like Drew Brees and Tom Brady, who are just solid passing quarterbacks, ranked higher than dual threat quarterbacks like Dak Prescott and Deshaun Watson. I do know that Deshaun Watson lost DeAndre Hopkins, but he's still a dual threat quarterback, and I think he can perform well. And dual threat quarterbacks tend to get more fantasy points than just throwing quarterbacks. So I'm a little curious on why you have Drew Brees and Tom Brady and Matt Ryan ranked higher than players like Deshaun Watson.
Okay, so let's talk about, I already talked about Tom Brady a bit. Let's talk about Drew Brees, right? So Drew Brees, the defense isn't going to be solely focused on his throwing because there's Alvin Kamara in the backfield. So they're going to have to be balancing both. And also, Drew Brees has not only Michael Thomas, but now he also has Emmanuel Sanders to add to an amazing group of receivers, which the Saints already possess, along with a really good offensive line, which they've buffeted in the past couple of drafts. I feel like Drew Brees can easily have another really, really good throwing season left in him. Maybe 1 or 2 more, but I think that's definitely there. Now, talking about players like Dak Prescott and Deshaun Watson. So Deshaun Watson, I feel the reason why he's slipping down a lot, many places, he was obviously like number 2 or number 3 last year. Many places have him at around 5 to 7 this year. I put him at 9 because he's lost a lot of motivation. He clearly is a dual threat quarterback, but he isn't. There's likely to be controversy with the Texans organization, even if it isn't showing yet. He won't feel the same.
Can you just repeat the part about Deshaun Watson? My Wi-Fi cut out, so I didn't really hear
sure.
it.
A lot of places have Deshaun Watson slipping from around 2nd or 3rd last year to around 5th to 7th here. I have him at 9 because I think there's going to be a loss of motivation on his part, and there's going to be some tension between him and the Texans organization, causing him to play a lot poorer. He doesn't have DeAndre Hopkins. That's the biggest thing. So number 1 receiver is, Will Fuller. Yeah, and also, even though he'll run the ball, he could easily get injured. And if he gets injured, he has no motivation to come back super quickly. And the thing with Dak Prescott, I feel even though he did really well last season, he is the type of person to – I haven't seen, like, the greatness of Dak Prescott in the same way I was saying like greatness in a lot of these other quarterbacks. I feel like he is easily a person who can crumble under pressure, throw a bunch of picks in really dumb ways. Even though he's really talented and he has a talented group of people around him, they have no excuses this year. They've gotten rid of the bad front office. They have all the weapons they need, but I don't think they'll perform that well this season overall.
I think that
and also he's comfortable with his payday. He just got paid as of June 22nd. He got like $31 million or something. So yeah, he's comfortable. He's not in a contract year. So yeah.
But I think that the logic that you applied to Drew Brees can be applied in the same way to Dak Prescott. They're going to be not solely one-dimensional, just like the Saints, because they have an amazing running back in Ezekiel Elliott. I think that Dak Prescott's weapons in terms of wide receivers are stronger because he has players like because he has Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb, whereas the Saints really only have Michael Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders as standout receivers. And I think that the Cowboys' O-line is still the strongest in the NFL. So I think that Prescott's weapons are just stronger than Brees. And I think that even if he is an amazing quarterback himself, the pieces that he has around him will carry him to success. All right. Finally, we have a hot take segment where we will make some potentially controversial prediction related to fantasy football players this upcoming year. So let's go to mine first, which is about DJ Moore, the wide receiver for the Panthers. And people look at his fantasy stats last year, and which is a decent 15 points per game, but they don't realize just how impressive he was during the second half of the season, where he averaged 20 points per game. And not only that, he did all of that with the terrible provisional quarterback during Cam Newton's absence, Kyle Allen. Whereas this year he has Teddy Bridgewater throwing to him, who has 2 more years of starting quarterback experience in Minnesota, as well as a respectable 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns as a backup last year. So with this strong offense, Panthers offense with Christian McCaffrey and the new addition Robbie Anderson, if DJ Moore can build upon the amazing form that he ended last season with, I can see him getting 20 yards per game in PPR formats and being a top 10 receiver this year.
Yeah, on that note, completely by chance, my hot take is about Teddy Bridgewater being around a 10th to 15th best quarterback in terms of fantasy. He clearly has the wheels. He's a dual threat quarterback. And also, he has weapons such as DJ Moore on the Panthers. So while there's going to be a lot of focus, rightfully so, on Christian McCaffrey, Teddy Bridgewater showed that when he has some weapons, he can capitalize on them last year, going perfect 5-0 with the Saints team while Drew Brees was out. So I think that although a lot of people are seriously doubting his potential to return as a top quarterback in the league, especially after his first stint as a QB1 did so bad, I think that he'll be able to return after being under the tutelage of Drew Brees for a year.
I don't know about that one because at Minnesota, he averaged only 3,000 yards a season, which is pretty bad for a quarterback, or just mediocre, I would say, under 200 yards per game. That's not the best. But I feel like his stats with the Saints were a little bit inflated, given that he had one of the best O-lines in the league in front of him. And I don't know if the Panthers have the same exact firepower with their O-line. And also with the receiving core, Michael Thomas was probably the best receiver in the league at the time. And the Panthers' best receiver is DJ Moore. And DJ Moore is good, but he's definitely not as good as Michael Thomas, who is a huge target and very good catching. So I don't know if Teddy Bridgewater will be amazing, but I think he'll be okay, but not as good as you guys are making him out to be.
I don't know. I still think that I'm not saying he's going to be a top 10 QB. I could easily see him with, say, injuries going to other quarterbacks, people not respecting his ability to run as much, and people not respecting the Panthers overall. I feel like that team could easily have around a 500 record and go and have really good seasons from Teddy Bridgewater and DJ Moore.
Okay, so let's move on to my hot take. My hot take is about DeVante Parker becoming a top 5 wide receiver. I believe I already explained this a little bit, but to talk about it a little bit more, with all the recently acquired players in the draft, I'm confident in this hot take that he will become a top 5 wide receiver. Last year, the Dolphins' offense was absolutely terrible, and Ryan Fitzpatrick was one of the most sacked quarterbacks in the league. And with the addition of all the new offensive linemen, I feel like the Dolphins will be able to defend their quarterback position a lot better, allowing DeVante Parker to receive more accurate and more passes in general. And given that DeVante Parker is able to put up 1,200 receiving yards and 9 touchdowns with the lackluster Dolphins offense, imagine what he could do with Tua Tagovailoa as the quarterback and all these new pieces on the Dolphins offense. I feel like DeVante Parker definitely has the potential to pull off a very good season and become one of the best wide receivers in the league.
Yeah, I just don't think that the Dolphins O line has improved enough to really protect Tua well. They got Austin Jackson in the draft, who's really a developmental player who's not going to be a very good offensive tackle in his first year, especially. I think that Tua's going to have a lot of like sack problems, and I don't think that the Dolphins are going to be an incredible offense this year.
I'm actually with Rohan on this. I feel like the Dolphins are a much improved team and they're very underrated. I feel like we talked in our first episode, check that out, which we were talking about record predictions. Both Rohan and I feel that the Dolphins could easily have around a 500 or even a positive record, going like 9-7 or 10-6. I think that a lot of teams will underestimate them, and Tua definitely as a very accurate thrower, especially on deep balls, which is really good for DeVante Parker because he is multifaceted as a receiver and easily could be catching long balls for huge amounts of fantasy points. So I feel that he gets a couple of those every week. He could easily slide up into the top 10, top 5 possibly.
And also adding on to what Aki said, I think Tua is also a dual threat quarterback. With Fitzmagic last year, he was very old, and I don't know if he was able to avoid the sacks like Tua could. So even though the Dolphins O-line has only improved a little bit, or who knows how much they're going to improve, but let's just say they improved a little bit. Tua is a dual threat quarterback, and sort of like Russell Wilson, even though Russell Wilson has a very bad O-line, he is very mobile, so he can avoid sacks very well. And I feel like Tua will be able to pull off a similar sort of situation like Russell Wilson.
All right, so that just about wraps it up for our third episode of Hike and Spike. Make sure to let us know how what players you think will do well in fantasy this year. And if you liked this podcast, make sure to like it. And if you didn't, tell us why so we can change it in the future. This is the guys from Hike and Spike signing off. See ya.